to Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. Small town feel with big time ideas. Brad Allard.
Well, we're back on the air. Josh, who's that voice on the voiceover? I don't recognize that voice anymore.
I don't know.
He's some guy named Taylor. I remember meeting him one time, big celebrity that he is. I don't know if he's going to hear this or not, but we miss you, Taylor.
We miss you, Taylor.
Yeah. Well, let's hope Facebook doesn't hose us like they did a couple of days ago. That'd be bad. Now, that show that I did with the Chamber went through on YouTube fine, and so if you want to catch that one on YouTube, also was on the radio station. So you got the whole show there, but on the Facebook, it glitched up or whatever. I think Mark Zuckerberg just doesn't like me. You think that's possible?
Who knows?
Who knows, right? Well, today, though, my guest, I had a tentative guest, but it was tentative, and about 36 hours ago, she said that maybe later in the month it'll work better for her schedule, and so I said, great, so she'll be on. I'd rather not say who it is because I don't want to put pressure on the poor lady because she may have to back out then too. But anyway, she'll be on probably later in the month. It's been an interesting show, good show, I hope. I'm sure it would be. Today I'm going to rant and rave about Trump and the tariffs and Trump and the courts, and then a segue into this business of troops in the city, particularly Chicago. So we have a little video clip with that, and we have some other entertaining things, but it's just there's some things that are very concerning about the way Mr. Trump is dealing with the economy and the use of government power, and I'm going to be discussing that, and I'll try to be as tactful as I can. And I almost entitled this show an appeal to my fellow conservatives, because what Mr. Trump is doing in the economy and how he's handling some of these court decisions is not in line with the conservative philosophy. And that's why so many of my fellow Republican conservatives feel adrift in terms of our party affiliation, because this is not what the Republican Party has stood for in the past. And we can't just get to a mindset that if there's an R behind it, it must be good, because it's not the case. And if people want to say, well, the Democrats do it, well, that's their problem, So, and I would say the same thing to them, but that's for them to figure out. But the fact that we've got into a situation where the Republican Party is vastly different than the Republican Party of Reagan and Bush and whatnot over the last 40 years, and I got 3 or 4 prime examples of that. And hopefully that's why, if you are, like myself, kind of a displaced Republican, hopefully this will resonate with you. Anyway, before we jump on that, why don't we jump on to our sponsors? Obviously, Our Place, Auto, etc. is a great deal. Always a good service, great food. It's a very comfortable atmosphere. When I walk in there for breakfast or lunch, it's a very hometown feeling. All right, it really is our place, so to speak. So because the atmosphere is such that you don't feel any kind of tension at all, and and it's a nice place to go. And also, they have a very stable staff. And that's a very important thing. You don't see that in a lot of restaurants where you have the same waiters and waitresses and help staff and kitchen staff, because there's a lot of turnover in restaurant business, but he seems to have a very consistent staff, and that's a really good thing. It's a good sign about how Otto treats his employees. Also, Gina's is running a pretty good special. I think you buy a meal there, you get a 54-cent beer this week. It's like their anniversary of sorts, and it's a really good deal. And the pizza, of course, is great, and the atmosphere is great. I love the music, and now I don't mean just the live music. I mean just the piped in music. He does that blues music, and I just really love it. And so it's a really good deal. And also 2 weeks from today, probably one of the most important shows I do all year is the nonprofit marathon, if you will, over at Gina's, where I have several nonprofits there. I've already had 3 that have officially told me that they're going to be here. I have 3 or 4 that normally are there. I wouldn't mind you letting me know just to make sure. But if you want to take part in this, message me on Facebook or something like that, and we'll get it taken care of. So thank you, Otto, for your community support. Also, John Williams. John over at All Pro Roofing, 817-734-2756. Before the wintertime comes, October and whatnot starts with the nasty weather kind of thing, and the cold and the damp and then the possibilities in the wintertime of ice storms. You need to get that roof inspected to make sure that you don't have any holes in the roof or leaks. And he'll tell you yes or no. He won't upsell you. I know that people are often reluctant to have people come, work crews come look over their house, whether it be plumbing or whether it be air conditioning, whether it be roofing, and they get this upsell. Well, you won't get it with John. Now, actually, I got a couple other friends that I could recommend. Hawkeye Plumbing and the True Climate people over at Will Cobb and Emily Cobb will help you with HVAC and plumbing. They'll do this. They're the same as quality people as John, so I just kind of threw that in there. I just saw them this morning. So there you go. So give him a call again, 817-734-2756, and he'll tell you what you need to know. Also, Jeff Kelly over at the Wethington Agency, 817-781-0546, or Jeff at jeffkellyrealty.com. He'll help you buy or sell a house in this area. Burleson's still a pretty good market. It's still not as hot as it may have been about 3 years ago, but it's still a pretty good market. I was talking to a mortgage broker, my friend Candy Gal over at Camco yesterday, and asked her how business was, and she said it's fairly steady now, so that's a good thing. Also have another realtor friend and said she's doing pretty well. Jeff's doing pretty well, but real estate doesn't move well by yourself. I mean, I know there's all these self-help or sell by owner kind of things and whatever else. You need somebody to represent you so you get the best deal, and Jeff Kelly will do that for you. Also, my friend Tiffany Jane, you should have your magazine by now on Local Life. 30,000 homes got it. A lot of businesses have it. I got my oil changed, and there it was. I was over at the Christian Brothers getting my oil changed, and there it was. And so while I'm waiting, I'm thumbing through the magazine. So the thing is, you get more views than just the 30,000 homes. You get a lot of views with Tiffany Jane's outfit. And I believe she's looking for somebody to help sell things. Taylor says he's watching live from Burleson, Texas. All right.
The man himself.
The man is like... How about that? We have had a Taylor Perky sighting. That's so wonderful. Anyway, send me a link, why don't you? All right, Taylor, while you're listening. Also, thank you to our friends at the Burleson Opportunity Fund. I'm going to be promoting this pretty hard the next month because on October 9th, yes, that's the 9th. I'll get the right date. October 9th is the big breakfast over at First United. Many of y'all got mail from us. I'm a part of that group, so is Victoria Johnson, so is the mayor, so is several members of the community. And this is the big fundraiser we have every year for scholarships for the Opportunity Fund. And what the Opportunity Fund does is it provides scholarships for BISD students, not necessarily just BHS and CHS, but if you live in the district, and that includes homeschool and private school. If you live in the district, they'll pay for the first year at Hill College. Well, I mean, and I can't tell you how many people have come up to me over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly since I taught at Hill so long, and they talk about what a blessing the BOF has been. So look for this in your mail. It's also on the website. There's also, sign up. It doesn't cost to attend, but there is going to be a shakedown, so to speak. That's what there's all about. And kind of remind me also that night, it's a busy day, October 9th, and is the Next Step Gala, and they're going to have it over at the Doubletree Hotel over off Alta Mesa, and they had no charge for that too. You need to let them know that you're coming. I got my tickets yesterday. It'd be very helpful if they know you're coming, but there's no charge for it, but they also will have an ask, and that's how these things work, and nobody is confused by that. But back to the breakfast, it is at the First United Methodist, starts around 7:30, and you're going to hear testimonies from people who have been benefited from the BOF, and from parents and students. And I know there's a special guest of sorts. I mean, he has sent a recorded message, and I'll let you just find out who it is when you get there, because I don't want to spoil the surprise. But anyway, do we have any more ads running? Yes, we do. This is a one-day only thing, and I found about this morning at Station 330 from 4 to 9 today. So if you're listening today, or you're listening to the radio when I put this on at 6, it's 4 to 9 over at Station 330, and a portion of your proceeds will go to Promises Community. Promises has been on my show several times. I'm part of it. They're part of my church. They're a group I support, certainly. And a portion of your proceeds will go help fill the pantry and the toiletries. That's another thing. You know, it's a lot. That's harder to get than you might think. I mean, nobody really thinks about toiletries that much. Think of it as a food pantry, but no, they have toiletries as well, and they need them. But the point is, if you go over there, you will get a great meal for a great deal, and you'll be helping out a lot of people over at Promises Community. I've been there several times, and it's they're doing pretty good business. I'll just put it that way. Maybe more than they should. That's another show, another topic. But anyway, I'm going through all the shares here, so let's make sure I get everybody on board with all of this. Okay. All right, I think we're good. All right. Mr. Trump has made it very difficult for people like myself to remain, in our own minds anyway, part of the Republican Party. Because what he's doing is not Republican. It's not conservative. Yet the emotional attachment Mr. Trump engenders from so many people gives him a lot of latitude to do things that in other times we would have gone absolutely crazy had Mr. Biden or Mr. Obama or Mr. Clinton done any of these things. The point is that we live in a government that has certain norms and certain constitutional standards, and we can't apply them only to people that we dislike when they do it, and then ignore them when somebody we like violates them. And that's what's happening here in so many cases with Donald Trump. Is that the things that he has done that is so infuriating isn't some liberal thing. It's that he. Well, let me rephrase that. That's not a good way of putting it. It's not that he is being restricted by the Constitution. That's not really where the anger should lie. It should be that the fact is that our president basically has taken a who's going to stop me attitude about all these things he's doing. And somebody, one of my listening audience, told me about like what happened in Colorado, where they moved the Space Force from Colorado to Alabama, to Huntsville, which has a NASA presence. So it's not like they're going from ground zero. But so Huntsville does have NASA and space-related activities there. But he moved it out of Colorado not because it was a better facility at Huntsville or whatever. It's because Mr. Trump did not like Colorado's voting laws, and he said so. This isn't not implied. He said so because Colorado allows mail-in voting. Then he's going to move thousands of jobs from Colorado and to move them to Alabama. I don't know what to say about that, other than that Republicans and conservatives would be screaming from the rooftops about abuse of power had somebody other than Trump done this. And on a segue on the election stuff, I haven't really talked about that yet, but Mr. Trump is putting out an executive order saying no more mail-in ballots. Well, in 2022, Mr. Biden tried to pass what they called the John Lewis Election Act, which I talked about as was going on then 3 years ago, which would have mandated a federal standard through all 50 states about voting, which would include day of registration, mail-in voting, absentee voting, all sorts of things like that, massive amount of drop boxes and things of that nature, and it would impose that across the country. And the Republicans are going crazy about how this violates the Constitution, that the states run the elections, and it is in the Constitution. It does also say that Congress can make sure that certain laws are enforced, like civil rights laws and things like that, and it is in the Constitution, but basically the states run the elections, and the Republicans are yelling, we want out of the federal government out of our elections, and no imposing whatever else. What Mr. Trump did is exactly the same thing. He wants to ban all mail-in voting. I'm not a big fan of mail-in voting, even though in a couple of years I'll be eligible for it in this state because I'll be over 65. But the fact is that he wants to ban it nationwide, and they want to impose voter ID nationwide. Now, again, I support voter ID, but I support the states doing it. And if a state doesn't want to do voter ID, I think that's stupid, but that's their problem in a sense. I know Massachusetts does not have voter ID. I think it's dumb, but I don't want the government mandating it because I don't want government mandating this level of intrusion on state activities. I mean, I have to be consistent. I was very much opposed to what Mr. Biden was doing in 2022 when it came to voting. And he was accused in Georgia, which is what I was focused on, about how, we're going back to Jim Crow, and they were supporting, racism and all this other stuff. And I thought that's kind of demagoguery is what divides our country. It's the same thing happening here from the other side. And yet, it just the conversation hadn't changed. Just who's having that conversation has changed. And I think if we want to be consistent, both as Republicans, which is fine, but as conservatives, or somewhat conservative, there are a couple of things I'm a little looser on, I might say. We need to be consistent. Trump is Irma says here, Irma Crisp, Trump essentially has essentially a cult-like following, which is giving this entire administration unhinged level of confidence to do these things. A lot of people compare Trump to Obama. Obama had a tremendous following as well, and there were times I thought he exceeded it. His authority, like with the Dreamers Act, or it's not an act, a Dreamers executive order, which the content I didn't object to is the method I objected to. I always make that clear because I think I want to make people understand that I'm not opposed to what was going to be done. I was opposed to how it was done. But anyway, the point is that Trump basically, again, has a who's going to stop me attitude. And people view the courts as an obstacle to what he's trying to do. Well, the same courts in many cases were an obstacle to what Biden tried to do, like with school loans or a moratorium on evictions during COVID that he didn't have authority to do, and the mandating of vaccines in the military, or other places which he did not have the authority to do. So, the courts 4 years ago were a bulwark of democracy. Now they're an obstacle to it. But let's look at one of the clips here that talks primarily about the tariffs, which is really the essence of the show, or at least the first half. I just got distracted with the election thing because that really does bother me that that Mr. Trump is trying to impose a federal standard across the board on elections when that, to me, is not just inappropriate but unconstitutional. But anyway, the first clip, if you would, Josh.
Tonight, the president seen briefly on camera for the first time in days, heading to his golf club in Virginia. His schedule quiet as federal courts this weekend intervened to limit Mr. Trump's presidential powers on two major fronts, ruling many of his tariffs illegal and an overnight ruling that blocked his administration from fast-tracking deportations of undocumented individuals. A federal judge struck down Trump's executive order, expediting deportations without giving migrants the opportunity for an asylum hearing. The government had previously only used this power to quickly deport individuals detained near the southern border. The judge writing, the policy would inevitably lead the government to erroneously remove people. The Department of Homeland Security saying President Trump has facts and common sense on our side. This pushback to the president's executive authority just hours after federal appeals court judges told Trump that he could not unilaterally implement most of his massive tariffs on imports from countries around the world. The court writing, the power to impose tariffs is vested exclusively in the legislative branch by the Constitution. Neil Katyal is an attorney for the plaintiffs.
If President Trump thinks these tariffs are so important, he has a way to get them through, which is go to Congress and get them approved.
The court will allow the tariffs to remain in place until at least October, leaving the White House a chance to appeal. Trump posting online that the decision should be reversed with, quote, the help of the United States Supreme Court.
And Vaughn Hilliard joins me now from the White House. Vaughn, also Chicago leaders tonight pushing back against the president's threats to surge federal immigration agents in that city.
Okay.
Right, Jose. Today, Chicago's mayor signed an order saying local police will not collaborate with federal agents. It comes as two federal law enforcement officials say the Trump administration is preparing to send agents to the city as soon as next week. And the president has suggested trying to send the National Guard as well. Jose?
We thank you for watching.
All right, that's good. All right, that I will address that at the latter half of the show, but let's talk about the tariffs and what's happened with them. In 1977, Congress passed a law to allow President Carter, to impose tariffs on mostly it was the Middle Eastern countries, and also to impose tariffs on countries that were seen as engaging in un-American activities like some of our Cold War opponents. Now, Mr. Carter really did not use that emergency tariff very often, and neither did Mr. Reagan, and neither did the Bushes as much. Now, W did right after 9/11 in certain cases, but it was a case-by-case basis. It wasn't this universal tariff that's going on. Mr. Trump is declaring basically a universal emergency on two basic rationales. One is that unfair trading partners are ruining the American economy, and the other one is a lot of these countries are bringing in fentanyl and other drugs into the country, and their countries aren't doing anything about it. Well, first of all, it's hard to support the idea, the first rationale, that the unfair trading practices when basically, in most cases, the tariffs that foreign countries placed on ours were basically at the low levels that we placed on theirs. We did not have, before Mr. Trump, zero tariffs. Okay, we had tariffs, but they were pretty light. And they basically were imposed upon countries that we were running trade deficits with. Now, does that constitute an emergency or not? I'm not so sure. In fact, let me just be frank. It's not an emergency if we run a trade deficit, because what does that mean? We run a trade deficit with, say, some foreign country that makes toys and doodads and tennis shoes. Would we, say they're taking American jobs? No, they're not. Americans aren't going to work for the kind of wages that these foreign workers will work for, and then you go to Walmart and we get the benefit of it. We get cheaper clothes. They're making cheap clothes in Honduras. We get cheaper clothes. We put a tariff on them. Who's going to pay the price? It's not just going to be the workers in Honduras. It's going to be people who buy the shirts at Walmart. A tariff is a tax. I fully agree with what the appeals court said about taxes. A tariff is a tax. It was a primary way we financed the government up until the income tax took that over. We passed the income tax in 1913 when they ratified or amended, rather, the Constitution, the 17th Amendment. No, the 16th, I'm sorry. I'll get it right, dummy. The 16th Amendment. But it really didn't take over in terms of the amount of income coming into the country until after the World War II. And so the point is that, tariffs are a tax, and this is being unilaterally imposed. And because we have a Congress that is so cowardly and so craven in their devotion or their fear of Mr. Trump that they're not going to do anything about it. I support this ruling, if no other reason that it's going to force Congress to actually man up or woman up, whatever you want to phrase it as, and pass the tariffs as the Constitution dictates. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 says Congress, the legislative branch, will have the sole power to lay taxes and tariffs. And Trump is just doing unilaterally based on what he thinks is best. We have a tariff with Brazil, for example. 50% tariff with Brazil, which we run a trade surplus with, by the way. Why do we have a trade tariff with Brazil? Because he's angry with the Brazilian government because they're prosecuting a pal of his, a former president of Brazil. Bolsonaro is his name. And they're prosecuting him for corruption. And he thinks that's wrong, so he put a 50% tariff on him. So it's that kind of arbitrary application of tariffs that is in complete violation of any legal or constitutional norm. Now, if we have problems trade-wise with other countries, we can deal with that. But people say, all these jobs are leaving the country. Then why don't we do things other than punish the American people to try to solve these problems? Okay? For example, a lot of people made a big deal about John Deere leaving Iowa and Illinois and moving to Mexico. Why? It wasn't just the wages. It was also the massive amount of regulations that they had to deal with the federal government. Why don't we deal with those regulations and make it easier for John Deere to do business and pay a higher wage than what they're going to be paying in Mexico? That's the solution. The solution is not just to punish people, by imposing tariffs. Your vegetables in the market are going to be more expensive this fall. Why? Because of tariffs on Mexico and Central America and everything else. Who's paying the price for that? Not just the Mexican growers, you and I are. Is that the whole point of this? Now, they're looking at it also as the fact that the tariffs are raising a decent amount of money for for the government. Yeah, they say that it's going to raise probably $250 billion over the course of a year. Well, that $250 billion didn't appear out of nowhere. It appeared out of your pockets, okay? And out of the pockets of the companies you work for. So when they tell you, Republicans tell you, when Trump tells you, I did not raise taxes, I cut your taxes, that's a damn lie because you're paying a tax right now. And so these tariffs are they're going to hurt foreign countries, but it'll hurt us more. And they always have. You know, and a lot of people talk about the tariffs we put place on countries during the Great Depression and how it increased the Depression. They're not wrong. That infamous Smoot-Hawley tariff that your high school teacher told you about, it's going to be a problem if for our economy. Our unemployment rate is not just ticking up. I'm not a big fan of the unemployment rate because of the way they do it. But the fact is that it is causing stagnation in our economy, these tariffs. And yes, I agree. He said he was going to lower prices. That is not happening. And it wouldn't happen under tariffs. It's impossible to happen under tariffs. And so that's why I get so mad, because the Republicans would be going absolutely off the chain if this had been done by Biden. But now these snivellers in Congress will let him do whatever he wants because they're afraid they'll get primaried. And don't think I'm just making that up. That's exactly what's happened to several Republicans who actually stood up to Trump during, the big, beautiful bill and whatever. A great example is Chip Roy. Chip Roy raised hell. He was all against it. He's going to raise the deficit until he meekly voted yes. And now he's not running for re-election. He's going to run for attorney general. He's going to get out of Congress because he couldn't fade the heat. All right? And also, there's several other Republicans that are getting primaried because they raised Cain about certain things until they came across and voted yes. And there's other things, other abuses of power as well. Here's another thing that the Republicans should be upset about, but they're not. And that is the takeover of private corporations or ownership, equity ownership in private corporations by the government. Okay? Yesterday, they announced a big deal with Intel. The United States government is now a 10% owner of Intel. That the government ownership of private corporations, the takeover of the means of production. What is the word for that? You have a guess, Josh? You want to take a guess? What's the word for government takeover of private corporations? Starts with an S. Ends with socialism. Right? It's socialism. That's exactly what it is. A government takeover of private corporations and having the government direct their activities is exactly what this is. And then no one is saying anything about it except for some of the media. And I'm not talking about lefties. I'm talking about who would be fine with it under Biden, by the way. They think this is not a bad idea. Bernie Sanders, for example, endorsed government ownership of Intel. Okay, so if Bernie Sanders endorses it, guys, come on, Republican, conservative types. If that's not a waving red flag, literally and figuratively, I don't know what it is. But for example, I've got 4 companies that the United States government now has an equity position in, and are using that position as what they call one of the primary or golden share owners. In other words, they have more directive authority than, say, an average shareholder. One is U.S. Steel. Nippon Steel wanted to buy U.S. Steel about 18 months ago, and Biden didn't want to do it because he thought it would hurt the unions and such as that and all this other business. And Trump campaigned against Nippon Steel buying U.S. Steel. He said, we don't want foreign ownership of our companies. Well, about 5 months ago, he changed his mind, and the United States got a big piece of U.S. Steel now. So to approve the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel, the Japanese company, the United States was given a piece of the action. Same thing with NVIDIA. They basically said, you sell to certain countries, we want a 15% cut. Okay, so if they sell these chips to China, which prior to this, they were going to say, no, we don't want you to sell those chips to China because they could be used for military purposes. And then NVIDIA said, we'll give you a cut. Okay, it's okay now. So NVIDIA, when they ever sell, potentially dangerous microprocessors to our opponents, the United States government gets a cut. So I guess the level of danger ain't that great. where the money's that good. MP Materials, never heard of that before, right? I haven't heard of it before, but they have America's largest share of ownership of precious minerals, rare earth minerals, okay? United States government said, you want to continue to mine? Give us 10%, which they did. And then you have the Intel deal, okay? He also basically has threatened Walmart for if they raise their prices. He's threatened a 100% tariff if Apple continues to make phones overseas. So your Apple phone is going to be more expensive. This is not what a conservative government does. This is not what a Republican government does. They do not use their power in this manner. The Republicans always used to stand for free markets and free trade. And yeah, are there problems with that? There's no universally perfect economic or political system. I mean, Madison said that. He said the goal of our government is to be the least imperfect, not the most perfect. So, people that have criticism with the capitalist free market system, that's another conversation. But this is not what most Republicans and conservatives have stood for over the years. Okay? The idea that the government is not only owning some of the parts of the company, but directing their activities for political purposes. I don't know what to say about that, except this is exactly what a socialist does. Okay? Now, people say, well, Obama did that with General Motors. Yes, they did. When Obama did it, General Motors was about to go bankrupt, so the government basically bought an equity position, but it's been sold off since then. And as far as managing the company itself, there wasn't nearly like this kind of directed activity that Mr. Trump is getting. And so the government's getting a piece of the action, and so is, now I'm not going to say, and I don't want to make myself misunderstood, he's not personally getting money directly, but he has benefited from it politically in terms of when it comes around to political donations to himself or his chosen candidates, you know where the money's going to come from. Okay, so again, I don't know if the Donald Trump bank account got $1 from this, but certainly his proposed candidates and his own political campaigns, whatever else, is getting it. Okay, Irma asked me a question. Genuinely curious, since you're more plugged in the conservative community, not as much as I used to be, because some of them don't talk to me much anymore. Are you hearing that folks regret their vote or didn't understand the platform, or is it truly blind loyalty as it seems? That's a hard question, because the answers, it's all over the board. I've had answers, all of them said, well, the main answer I normally get to kind of sum that up is better than Biden. And when I talk to Democrats, the main answer I get from them is better than Trump. And that's a hell of a deal right there, that the only reason we voted for our guy or this guy is because we don't see him as bad as that guy. I've talked to several that voted for Trump, and they don't like what he's doing, but they all go back to that position. But it'd be worse under Harris or under Biden. And that very well could be true, but we don't know that. But I'm just saying that's what, as far as they're not understanding the platform, I think on both sides of these elections, Democrat and Republican, they don't read the platform, and they just see the R or the D, and that's all that motivates them to vote. I don't, even a dork like myself, I don't read these platforms because they're mush. They're just saying I know what they're standing for. I don't need to waste my time reading this platform. Now, for some, it is true blind loyalty. But again, Irma, I'll tell you, blind loyalty works in both parties. I know people that would vote for Democrat if they put Beelzebub on the ticket. And I know people that would vote for Trump, again, twice over. And, they wave the flags and all the rest. So, yeah, the answer is all the above. I don't know. I think when you talk, I'm going to go back to the regret one. I think what they regret was being given the choice they were given. They felt this way in 16 and in 20 and in 24. That's what they regret, is just the poor choices both parties have been giving us. Okay? I look at the 2012 election. I didn't care for Mr. Obama at all, but I wouldn't say he's disqualified. As who he was and what he stood for disqualified him for presidency. Same with Mitt Romney. I was lukewarm about Mitt Romney. That's who I did vote for. But it wasn't like 16 when you had two egregious candidates, and in 20 and in 24. And that's what people regret most. That's the regret here almost universally is, why can't we have better candidates from both parties? Why can't we have consistency so we know what we're voting for? Okay, because if the things that Mr. Trump has done have been put on the Democratic platform, they would have gone crazy. But Trump, he's not bound by the Republican Party platform or anything else. And so his government ownership of or takeover of companies and ownership and directing companies for certain political and economic activities, that doesn't distinguish us from France or Spain or any of these other socialist countries. They do the same thing. We're going to switch over to, since we're going to be close on time, I want to talk about the troops in Chicago. I think we have another clip for that.
We do.
All right.
Here we go.
All right.
Tonight, protesters on the streets of Chicago demanding President Trump not deploy federal forces to fight crime in the Windy City. And the city's Democratic mayor ordering Chicago police not to cooperate with the feds.
No federal troops in the city of Chicago.
NBC's Adrian Broadus speaking to protesters.
The message for President Trump: stay out of Chicago. We don't need you here. We don't want you here.
President Trump has repeatedly floated the prospect of sending in the National Guard to crack down on crime in Chicago after deploying the Guard to Washington, D.C. But Illinois' Democratic governor slamming the potential move.
We don't want troops on the streets of American cities. Right. That's un-American.
The governor noting murders are down 32% in Chicago this year. Though this weekend, at least 53 people were shot and 7 people were killed in Chicago, leading one Democratic alderman to conclude federal help is needed.
Safely. I had 2 teenagers shot in my community this weekend alone. So when I hear my Democratic colleagues tell me, don't worry, crime is down, Trump stay home in Washington, I have a real hard time accepting that.
It comes as 2 federal law enforcement officials tell NBC News that ICE, Border Patrol, and other federal agencies do plan to scale up arrests of undocumented immigrants beginning this week in Chicago, a sanctuary city that does not cooperate with ICE.
We will continue to go after the worst of the worst across the country, like President Trump has told us.
All as a federal judge dealt a legal blow to the Trump administration, blocking flights deporting unaccompanied minors who came to the U.S. illegally from Guatemala back home. The judge criticizing those flights for being scheduled in the, quote, wee hours of the morning. The Trump administration arguing they were reuniting families at the suggestion of the Guatemalan government.
We thank you for watching. Okay. And remember,
I'm not going to get into deportation because I don't have time for that. But here's my issue with the troops in cities. First of all, people are upset about Trump overreaching in D.C. Well, D.C. is a federal district, and his ability to do what he's doing is much more loose, shall we say. It's greater because it's not a state, it's a federal district. And the federal district is directly administered and overseen by the federal government, even though you have, of course, you have city council and mayor and all this other stuff, and they're pretty autonomous and whatnot, but they still are subject to the governing powers of the federal government. I found it interesting that the mayor of D.C. has changed her tune a little bit since the troops have been there. Okay, I believe I have a screenshot of that from the Washington Post yesterday morning, I believe it was. Is floating around there somewhere. There it is. The Mayor Bowser, Muriel Bowser, to provide indefinite coordination with the federal law enforcement. She has come on and said, well, it's really not as bad as it seems, and our crime has gone down. Does that justify sending troops into major American cities, which are more autonomous than Washington, D.C., and certainly the states are? I regret that it's come to this point that Trump has been given an avenue in which to justify sending troops into major American cities for crime enforcement and law enforcement. The military is not really meant for that. It's not. In fact, there has been a Supreme Court decision in law, since the Reconstruction era, that basically prevents the federal troops from being used as law enforcement agents, the posse comitatus ruling, and I'll let y'all look that up. But the point is that what I regret is that Trump is not wrong that these major cities are very, very violent, and what bothers me as much or more than Trump yelling about maybe sending in troops is that these cities are so badly run when it comes to law enforcement, and so they engage in such, anti-law enforcement activities is the best way to put it. For example, Chicago in the last 9 years has decreased their police force by 1,600 officers. Okay, how is that helping the crime situation? And what bothers me, if you're watching it on YouTube or on Facebook, and you saw the clip, you'll notice there was interviewing this woman, who was said, "We don't want you here. We don't need you here." That's rubbish for one thing, because she doesn't live in Chicago, I'm quite sure. And if she does live in the city of Chicago, she doesn't live in the South Side where all this activity is going on. The South Side and the West Side, or East Side rather, of Chicago are war zones, okay? And even many of the black commentators talk about how the black community is the most harmed by the lack of law enforcement. And this white woman gets up there, and after she gave that interview, she probably skedaddled back to her protected condo or her suburb or whatever else. So that's what really bugs me a lot about this, is the hypocrisy of it. And then you get that idiot mayor. Brandon Johnson is the worst mayor in the country. And he's saying that they asked him on, what is that, Morning Joe, MSNBC? I saw the clip. I don't watch that show. And Joe asked him, Joe Scarborough said, is the answer to Chicago's problems and crime more law enforcement? No, we need more social services and affordable housing and all this other stuff. That's his answer. That's Brandon Johnson's answer. We need more affordable housing, which they make very difficult to do on other terms, So the point I'm making with that is that they will not address this issue as a law enforcement issue. They think it's a social issue. And while some of these cities are imposing some of these more lackadaisical law enforcement policies, cutting the number of police, things that sending counselors in violent situations instead of sending in armed police officers, crime gets worse in the city. And people that look at this from the outside and criticize it and get angry about it would never live in those areas of the city. That's what really drives me nuts. When I read this criticism and this anger on Facebook and other social media about how terrible it is that Trump is talking about sending in federal troops, they wouldn't live in those cities, and they wouldn't send their kids to those schools if their life depended on it, because their life would depend on it if they sent them there. A lot of these people that are so indignant about this whole issue wouldn't suffer the consequences of their position. Okay? And we all know places in Dallas and Fort Worth that we would never go. And, and some of the liberal critics of this are talking about, well, there's crime in Nashville, there's crime in, red state cities, Austin and Houston, whatever else. I don't know about Nashville, but I do know in Austin and Houston, they have followed some of these Chicago policies. My point is, I don't want troops in the city. I do not. Okay? I regret greatly that this is even seen as a possibility, because the way many of these cities are being run. What's some of the first things you think about when you want to go visit a city? Is it safe or not? And, Chicago is not safe. New York is not as safe as it used to be. Why did in the 90s, they really had cleaned things up. And then 2000s, why? Because Rudy Giuliani, who's since gone off the deep end, but back then he was a really good mayor. They had law enforcement. These cities will not enforce laws that are on the books. Second of all, they have basically said, we're not going to prosecute it. They talk about crime going down in the cities. You know why it's going down? Because only 1 in 7 assaults are reported. All right? That's Chicago, only 1 in 7 are reported. Why did they not report it? Because they know nothing's going to happen. Okay? Petty theft, they don't even prosecute for it in most counties, up at these cities. Dallas County was getting a lot of criticism. Why is Walmart and Target and Walgreens and CVS moving out of the cities? It's not racism, as they're being accused of. It's because they can't stay in business because the shoplifting is robbing them blind. And if it's under a certain dollar amount, they can't even prosecute. They won't prosecute. And so these cities basically have become lawless areas not because of any kind of genetical issue with people there or whatever else. It's because there's no law enforcement. And the people that suffer the most from all this are the very people the Democrat Party says they support, the black and brown communities in these cities. Brandon Johnson's abandoning the black community, or citizens of his own community, because he wants to be woke Mr. Politician. And so while the South Side is a war zone every weekend, he rants and raves that we're not going to cooperate with the law enforcement. Now, I want to state my point again. I don't want troops in the cities. What I want is these mayors and these governors like Pritzker to do their jobs. I sat across the table with the mayor last month, and I'll have him on next Monday, and I'm going to ask him again, what is the primary duty of a community government, a municipal government? It's the first thing is first responders, police and fire. That's the number one job, and everything else, even if they're important, comes behind that. All right, we want good streets, and we want our trash picked up and all that, and that's part of the deal. But if we don't have safe streets, it doesn't matter what else we got. We can't say, Burleson, we got great parks, but I'm afraid to go to them. All right, what difference does our parks make if we have no police enforcement? Fortunately, we do. We have very good police enforcement. That's why people are moving out of some of these cities into Burleson and like-minded communities, because they know that if they report an assault, they're going to get some actions best the police can provide. And if their perpetrator's caught, they will be prosecuted, not given out, basically, we're sure sorry for your situation and we're going to let you go on, with a reprimand. But most property thefts in these cities aren't even reported anymore. So crime is rampant no matter what the stats say. And we know this. You don't go to certain areas of Fort Worth or Dallas and leave your car unlocked. You don't go in there at all. Okay? Because it's dangerous. St. Louis, another dangerous town. I was there about 3 years ago, and I was with family, and we left before 5 o'clock. Why? Because after dark, it becomes a very dangerous place. And so that's what I regret, is that because Brandon Johnson and J.B. Pritzker and Karen Bass, a mayor of Los Angeles, and the mayor of San Francisco and Portland and some of the other blue-run cities, if you will. Atlanta is another one. Austin is another one. Austin, that one really kills me, really does, because, back in my younger days, Austin was known for being a really bohemian place that you could walk around and, go down 6th Street, go down to, some of the joints down there, go down and have a good time, whatever, and it was pretty safe. Now, you wouldn't go there after dark to save your life. And yesterday I was in Dallas, all right, and I saw more homeless people than I've ever seen before. And we could say, well, we're not providing enough resources for it and all this other stuff. That's another conversation, and that very well may be true. But I'd say nobody walks in neighborhoods with a lot of homeless and not have their anxiety rise. All right, people get anxious, even if they tell themselves in their heads that nothing's going to happen. They're more anxious than they were before when they see large numbers of homeless people. Back to the crime issue. If I understand why you'd be reluctant to have the troops in the city. I don't like it, because it is for some a dictatorial move. For me, it is. It's one of those things that Trump does so well, which is exploits Democrat weaknesses. They talk about the 80-20 type of issues where 80% of the American people are for it and 20% are against it, and that 20% usually is the more liberal aspect of the Democrat Party. Most people are going to say, well, I don't really want troops in the city either, but it is making it safer. Look at D.C., and it is safer in D.C. now. But it should never come to that. It should never come to that. And Pritzker's talk about he wants to be president in 3 years. And so Trump has picked Chicago in particular because not only is it very violent, but also because it's a way of making Pritzker be on the 20% of the issue kind of thing. And Johnson's an easy target for all the stupid crap he said. And here's another thing, by the way, it's a sideway note. That New York candidate's got so much attention, Zoran Mamdani. he's walking back a lot of his defund the police stuff now, because he's finding out the voters are actually want to be safe. You know, he said when he was a state legislator in New York, he said defund the police and send in social workers and just get rid of police altogether and get our incarceration out of our system. Now he's not so much, right? Brandon Johnson, I saw this on a clip also yesterday, said incarceration never works. We try to incarcerate our way out of it and it didn't work. Yes, it does. You take some violent criminal off the streets, it may, at least that one violent criminal won't be committing violent crimes anymore. Okay? Would it make a big dent in the violence? Depends on how well you do it. But if you prosecute crimes and are serious about it, crime rates and crime incidents will go down. It's intuitive logic that if you take some of the worst elements off the street, those worst elements won't be causing crimes. But that's not happening in Chicago. I used to love go to Chicago. I'll never go back again. I thought Chicago was a great town. Otto loves Chicago, and I've asked him, does he feel safe there? And he's going to visit family, and they know where to go and not to go and that kind of thing. But I loved it. I thought it was a great town. Downtown Chicago is a good place to go. I wouldn't go there now. I'm not going to subject myself and or Robin, my wife, or any other of my family members to that possibility. We went to New York many years ago. Loved it. Went to plays, had dinners, all this other stuff. Wouldn't go there now. And people that live there say, "Oh, it's not so bad." You know why it's not so bad for them? Because they know where to go and not to go. Does that make the city? Does that make it acceptable? If I go to Chicago and I know where not to go, the fact that those people that were in the places I would not go are living these kind of lives of danger, always under threat, that doesn't make me feel better. That I know where to go and not to go. If I'm really concerned about people and about the city, I'd be concerned about those people that are enduring these policies. And so, to get my attention on this, I need to see these people take security of the people they purport to support more seriously and get really serious about enforcing the law and prosecuting crimes. And until then, they got nothing. They won't have an excuse. All I have is white women in a yellow jacket saying, "We don't want you here, Mr. Trump." Now, excuse me, I'm going to be late for my tea. Nothing drives me crazy than, white upper class liberals. They drive me absolutely crazy because you see it in New York. Oh, tut. Trump's a barbarian, but they have guarded communities and armed guards at their front door. Harumph, what do you think, Josh?
I think you said it pretty well.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, you talked about tariffs. I was a little over the board, about, I was harsh on Trump on the tariffs and still am. As far as the troops in the city, if the Democratic mayors and governors wouldn't give them this opportunity, we wouldn't be talking about it, or we'd be talking about it differently. And the criticism of him being dictator would be more valid in some ways. But until those Democrat leaders of the cities and blue states start getting serious, then you're going to see more of this. Irma says, to play devil's advocate, because I'm with you on most of what why would we elect a felon if we care about crime? Well, I got nothing. Now you got me. I don't have any. I do believe some of the things he was charged with were pretty bogus, but that's not the point. Some of the things he was charged and convicted of, I think some of the laws that I think was really something that they took a law that was a misdemeanor in New York and turned it into a felony specifically to prosecute Mr. Trump for. That's okay. Is he a felon? Yes, by those standards. Did what he commit was a felony? Not when he did it, it was a misdemeanor. And then they said, well, we're going to turn this now into a felony and then charge Mr. Trump for violating the law. So that's why the felon thing has some gray area to it. Okay, because if he had been convicted of the misdemeanors, he would not be called. He wouldn't be technically a felon. So that's why, Irma, it's a little hard to tell people about that particular, this particular aspect of of Mr. Trump, is because a lot of people say that he was railroaded into this, and there's some evidence that they made a special case out of Donald Trump that they did not and would not make out of anybody else. Okay, and then, talk about some of the mortgage fraud issues. Well, the lieutenant governor of New York is now being investigated for the very same thing. And that's what people say. What about the sexual assault? That he was not convicted of a crime. Now, that's why the felon doesn't stick there. He was a civil judgment against him. Okay? Now, so that's why people just dismiss that as well. What's a good way of putting it? There's a lot of things in Trump's background that not only gave me pause, but made it a disqualification for me. And this was just part of it. But even if this not happened, it doesn't mean I really don't know how to address the sexual assault issue, because I do believe that in some, there's two sides to it, and I do believe that something that happened 30 years ago, I do believe that, because of Trump's braggadocio about his sexual conquests over the years, set him up for this. Okay, but again, it was not a civil. It was a civil case, not a criminal case. There are non-guilty and overcharged people in every prison. Yes, there are. Yes, there are. And that's a whole other topic for a whole other conversation. But I do agree that there are people in jail that are doing hard time for things that other people got a slap on the wrist for. And a lot of that depends not just maybe on race, but also their ability to acquire expensive attorneys and whatever else. That's, again, another show. I want to go back to the sexual assault thing, because I didn't think I explained it very well. I will abide by the court's judgment. I'll put it that way. But that wasn't, I think if this had been a one-off and Trump had lived a life that didn't promote the fact he was such a playboy and all this other stuff, I would have more doubt about it. But, Trump himself talked about all of his conquests, and he appears in, Playboy magazine, and he's appears in media as a player and all this other stuff, pictures with the Playboy playmates and porn stars and stuff like that. So he created an image for himself that would make this kind of accusation seem more credible. If they had said this about George W. Bush, I said it's a complete and total fabrication, because George W. Bush never had that reputation. But since Trump cultivated that reputation, it made it easier for people to find him guilty of this charge or liable, because, again, he wasn't convicted of a crime. That's the best way I can put it. I'll abide by the court's judgment. And as far as why people voted for him, that goes back to earlier what you said. Why did they vote? Well, better than Biden. Why did they vote for Biden? Better than Trump. That's a real problem. This will be on at 6 o'clock tonight and tomorrow, 1 o'clock tomorrow on community radio. I hope you get to hear it if you want. Yeah, I know, Irma. I know what he said. We don't need to repeat that on the air. Okay. Yeah, really. I'm not going to read it, so don't worry. Anyway, community radio will be having this on tonight, and 6 o'clock, 1 o'clock tomorrow. I hope you listen to it. Also, I remind you today, if you hear this in time, Station 337, that fundraiser for Promises Community to help them fill the pantries and whatever else. So I hope y'all can make it by and, have a hamburger or, a couple of drinks, whatever is on your mind. All right, next week I got the mayor on Monday, and then on Tuesday I got a new member of my networking group, BNI, a young woman named Stormy Barrett, and she's starting a new business, and she also is involved with that production, The Promise, over in Glenrose. So we're going to talk about that on Tuesday. And we share this with your friends because they all need to benefit from my wisdom and enlightened education, right, Josh? What do you think?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And besides, I need the numbers. And I'll see y'all next week.